Mr. President, you'll see for the next hour a whole group of Republicans coming to the floor to be able to talk about one issue, our need for border security and safer communities. This is something not just Republicans in the Senate are talking about. This is something the American people spoke loud and clear about during the last election when they elected President Trump, a Republican Senate, and a Republican House. There's not a single member that's a Republican in this body, in the House, or clearly President Trump, that didn't talk about border security and safer communities throughout the entire election. And every single poll showed that this was one of the priority issues that every single American was thinking about. A Gallup poll last year found that more than 3/4 of Americans support increasing the number of Border Patrol agents. 2/3 of Americans want the President and Homeland Security Secretary to temporarily halt all asylum requests when the border is overwhelmed. And third in this list, a majority of Americans support expanding border wall construction. People want a secure community. On the floor this week, we started last week and still debating this week, is what to do on what's called the Laken Riley Act. Now, some Americans are familiar with Laken Riley's story, some are not. Laken Riley was a college student in Georgia who was brutally murdered by a Venezuelan who came into the United States illegally, was detained at the border, but then released. Traveled around the country wherever he wanted to, under a parole system that was given to him in the border in 2022. He committed a crime, was arrested for that crime, and then was released. He committed another crime, shoplifting, was arrested for that crime, and then released. The third crime, as far as we know, there might have been many more, but the third crime, as far as we know, was his murder of Laken Riley. He should have never been in the United States. He should have never been paroled at the border. He should have been detained and then deported, but he wasn't. He was paroled into the United States. When he committed a crime in the United States, he should have been deported, but he was not. He was released. When he committed a second crime in the United States, he should have been deported, but he wasn't. He was released before he ever got to murder. The Laken Riley Act is pretty simple. It says if someone is here illegally and they commit a crime in the United States of stealing American stuff like he did, that he's deported. I don't think it's a radical concept to be able to say Americans don't want someone to come into the country illegally and take their stuff. Why this is even a challenge to be able to pass this, I have no idea. This passed in the House last session, but the Senate never took it up to even discuss it. If I go to any of the great 4 million Oklahomans from my state and I say, what do you think about someone illegally coming into the country and stealing people's stuff? Do you think that's okay that they should still be able to stay? I don't think I'd find anybody of the 4 million Oklahomans that would say, I'm okay with someone illegally coming in the country, stealing people's stuff, and saying, you can go ahead and stay. That's all that this bill does. It says if someone comes into this country illegally, starts stealing stuff, they are detained, they're held, they're not just allowed to be released and to be able to drift around the country to steal other things or to commit a murder later. If they come into our country illegally, they start stealing things, they are detained. And they'll go through the rest of the legal process. It doesn't mean they're automatically deported the very next day. They've still got a legal challenge there. They can have their legal challenge, but they're not going to just wander around the country. That's why we believe this Laken Riley Act is so important, because we never, ever, ever, ever want to have another American that is murdered by someone illegally present here, especially someone who had already committed multiple crimes before they ever got to that murder. So let's have the debate. I'm willing to be able to talk to any one of my Democratic or Republican colleagues that have a question about this. But at the base of this is, why would we let someone who was already illegally present in the country, who we already know has committed additional crimes, just continue to walk our streets just to commit more crimes. Why would we not detain those individuals? On Monday, President Trump will be inaugurated. I'm looking forward to working with him and seeing even what happens on day one to be able to secure the border. This is something the American people want. They want a border that is secure. They want communities that are secure, and they want just basic common sense things done. Like if someone breaks into our country and then steals stuff, they're actually detained, rather than just released to go do it again. Let's at least do the basics that we can do while we continue to be able to work towards the big projects that still need to be done. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. Multiple of my colleagues will be coming in the moments ahead to be able to talk through this same issue, because we feel like on this side, it is incredibly important we get this done.
The Senator from West Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. President. This week, the Senate is proud to take another step forward towards securing our southern border as we consider the Laken Riley Act. I want to extend my deep gratitude to Senators Katie Britt and Senator Ted Budd for their leadership in bringing this bill forward. First and foremost, I want to say that I strongly support this measure. With this bill, the Senate will be taking a bold step for the safety and prosperity of American citizens after 4 years of mismanagement, decline, and ultimately chaos at the border. The Laken Riley Act is the answer to a loud and clear call made at the ballot box by the American people to unite us as a country, to put America first, and to address the tragic lawlessness that we see on our southern border. And so the Senate's first order of legislative business, we are answering that call. The radical open border policies of the left have caused untold suffering to families across the nation, families like the Riley family, who are still grieving the unimaginable loss of their beautiful daughter, Laken. Laken was just 22 years old, a young nursing student with a promising future ahead of her. Tragically, she was stolen from this earth by an individual who should have never been allowed to roam free in this country. Laken should be alive today, and she would be if her killer had been brought to justice before it was too late. In Laken, we lost a bright and beautiful soul, as those who knew her will attest. The law should serve our citizens, yet it has somehow been Laken's killer that benefited from our system. It's time we honor Laken's legacy by putting American citizens first. The Laken Riley Act, while too late to prevent Laken's tragedy, is a targeted bill that will save countless other lives. It will ensure that other illegal immigrants, not dissimilar to her killer, are detained for their crimes before they get a chance to commit another and maybe more serious offense. Anyone who has entered the United States illegally and then committed a crime should and will face detention and deportation. And it sounds like common sense to me. Laken's killer was arrested 3 times and released 3 times, once at the border, again in New York City, and a 3rd time in Athens, Georgia, mere weeks before he took Laken's life. That will not happen and cannot happen under the Laken Riley Act. This is a problem that cannot be ignored or explained away or made trivial. The American people demand change. The American people want us to fix this system that failed to uphold the law and failed to keep Laken safe. Her cause is their cause. It's the cause of every mother, every father, every brother, every sister, of a young girl who simply wants to go to school and then go out for a run in her neighborhood and feel safe. I know at its core, this is truly a bipartisan issue. We all want to keep our communities safe, all Republicans and Democrats. Our Republican caucus and conference is completely unified behind the Laken Riley Act, and we've managed to win over a majority of Senate Democrats for the bill's initial consideration, including 2 have signed on as co-sponsors. As my Democrat colleague from Pennsylvania has noted, failure to pass this bill would represent everything that is wrong with Congress. The truth is, the American citizens have had enough talk, especially about these last 4 years. Now's the time for action. That's what the election was about. Action, not empty words. This week, we will have before us a tranche of critical votes that America will be intently watching. To the families watching who have lost loved ones like the Riley family, we stand with you. We feel your grief and your pain, and we will guard against this heartbreak ever happening again. Now more than ever, it is incumbent upon my colleagues and me to support America's families and pass the strongest possible bill for our communities. With that, I look forward to advancing the Laken Riley Act this week. And, Mr. President, thank you, and I yield the floor.
From North Dakota, sorry. Almost said South Dakota, sir. Senator from North Dakota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. We like South Dakota, too. They're pretty good guys. Oklahoma. We're fond of Oklahoma as well. Thanks, Mr. President. Today I join my colleagues in looking forward to January 20th, when we can turn the page on the failed border policies of the Biden-Harris administration and get back to common sense, a common sense approach to border security under President Donald Trump. During 4 years of the Biden-Harris border policies, our country saw the highest annual total of illegal alien crossings, the highest monthly total of illegal alien crossings, and the highest total of individuals on the terror watch list attempting to cross our border. These are the plain and simple facts. The Biden-Harris administration has made our country less safe, less secure, and more vulnerable to threats from abroad. The American people saw beyond the Biden-Harris administration's false claims that the border was secure. Last November gave a very clear and compelling mandate. Secure the border. Secure the border. Already the new Republican Senate majority is taking a first step to protect the American people against the consequences of the Biden-Harris administration's policies by working to pass the Laken Riley Act. Under this bill, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement will be required to detain illegal immigrants who have committed theft-related offenses and issue an immigration detainer request to local law enforcement for illegal aliens who have committed related crimes. The legislation can empower states to hold federal officials accountable when they fail to enforce federal immigration law. This important legislation is one we should have never had to pass. But because the Biden-Harris administration played politics with our country's borders and immigration policy, Senate Republicans are here today ready to work on behalf of the American people. Working with the Trump administration, we will prioritize the enforcement of policies that protect our southern border, which include reinstating the migrant protection protocols or remain in Mexico policy, enforcing safe third country agreements, and resuming construction of the border wall. In his first 100 days in office, President Biden revoked 94 Trump-era executive orders and reversed crucial border security policies. In less than a week, President-elect Trump will be sworn into office. He is committed to taking executive action on day one to reinstate the policies that will secure our border. I look forward to these changes and to working further to address the crisis created under the Biden-Harris administration. I also look forward to the debate that will take place in the coming weeks regarding how Republicans will secure the border through reconciliation, and we're already hard at work on that. This will be an important legislative tool that will help refocus resources so that the professionals at ICE, CBP, and U.S. Border Patrol can focus on the mission of securing our border, removing criminal aliens who should not be in the United States, and addressing potential threats to the homeland. To accomplish these goals, we must recruit and retain more border security professionals, modernize our border security tools like autonomous towers, and better utilize technology like the counter unmanned aircraft systems along the border. The cause of these threats to our homeland is clear: President Biden's failure to secure the southern border. Senate Republicans stand ready to work with President Trump to advance the policies that kept our border secure during his first administration. That's exactly what my colleagues and I will be working to accomplish every day in the coming months, because border security is national security. Thank you, Mr. President. And with that, I yield the floor.
Senator from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank my colleague from North Dakota and his comments and his support for this legislation. You know, one of the highest priorities of the next administration is securing the southern border, restoring law and order, and reversing the dangerous open border policies of President Biden. Too many Americans have felt the tragic consequences of these policies. And one of them was a woman named Laken Riley. She was a nursing student at the University of Georgia, and last year an illegal immigrant from Venezuela murdered her while she was out on an early morning jog. And what makes this story all the more devastating was that the killer should have been stopped, but wasn't. He should have been stopped at the border in 2022, but he was paroled into this country. He should have been detained when he was arrested in New York in 2023, but wasn't. He should have been detained when he was arrested in Georgia for shoplifting, but he wasn't. The chain of these events is downright shameful. We must make sure that these don't ever happen again, and that's why I worked with my good friend, Senator Katie Britt of Alabama, to reintroduce the Laken Riley Act. This bill would require ICE to issue detainers and take into custody illegal aliens who commit crimes like theft and shoplifting. We need to stop these individuals when they commit minor crimes before they're able to commit major crimes like the horrific murder of Laken Riley. The Laken Riley Act will empower the Trump administration to enforce our laws, keep our nation secure, and prevent tragedies. Ladies and gentlemen, this is common sense, but if you stay here in Washington long enough, you'll sometimes feel that common sense, it's not all that common. But I appreciate the newfound bipartisanship that seems to have broken out on Capitol Hill on this issue. It's wonderful. Dozens of Democrats have now supported the Laken Riley Act. I want to welcome them to the cause of law and order. But a word here about amendments. And I thank Leader Thune, who I think is off to a wonderful start, and I appreciate his leadership. He has opened this as promised to amendments. Several on this side of the aisle, several on the other. But let's just say that some of our friends on the other side of the aisle, they have an amendment. And let's say that it doesn't get the amount of votes. Let's not use that as a pretext for them not supporting this bill. Let's support this, and then you have our commitment to go back and work on that and take a look at that specific legislation that they were trying to introduce by amendment. But please don't use the failure of said amendment to not support this very important legislation. It's my hope that we can continue in this spirit and make sure that the Laken Riley Act is passed by both chambers and signed into law by our nation's 47th President, Donald J. Trump. I yield the floor.
Senator from Indiana.
Mr. President, I have 7 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Mr. President. President Biden is spending his final days in office on a valedictory tour. Now, here's one accomplishment he won't mention: a crisis on our southern border, which has spread chaos across our country, flooded our communities with fentanyl, and cost innocent American lives. Now, it's correct to call this one of President Biden's accomplishments. He intentionally reversed the Trump administration's border policies as soon as he reached the Oval Office. And it was by design, Mr. President, that millions of migrants who illegally crossed our southern border were released into our country. This self-inflicted disaster will be a major part of President Biden's ignominious legacy. And it is in part why Americans chose to return President Trump to office in November. When the American people voted for a Republican president and a Republican Congress, they were voting to restore the rule of law at the border. They were demanding that their government fulfill its constitutionally delegated duty to provide for their national security. They were demanding that their government do that. And they were arguing correctly that it is not discrimination for a nation to demand that those who seek to call it home do so legally. The American people want the return of common sense immigration policy. That's all. That's what I hear back home. But you see, this wasn't possible under President Biden. Beginning next week, we'll have a new president, and there will be no excuses. The open border policies must end. Criminal migrants must go. The number of Border Patrol and Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers must be increased. Barriers to illegal entry must be expanded and enlarged. Republicans are working on legislation which will help accomplish all of these things and improve the security of our border, just like the American people expect. It will be too little too late for the family of Laken Riley, though. Of course, she should still be with us today. The man who murdered her last February should have never set foot in America. Her death was preventable. Her killer entered this country illegally and was quickly paroled. Then he was sent at taxpayer expense to New York, where he was arrested and released. If that was the end of the story, it would still be an outrage and an indictment of the failed Biden administration. But from there, he went to Georgia, you see, all courtesy of taxpayers, where he was arrested and freed again before brutally murdering Laken Riley. Weakening border enforcement, incentivizing criminals with specious asylum claims to cross our border, failing to detain and deport these very same people for crimes committed far away from it. These were the policies that led to Laken's death. This cannot happen again. Can't happen again to another American or to their family. That is why we need to pass the Laken Riley Act. It won't single-handedly end the crisis at our southern border. No, that's not its objective. But it's an important first step in the broader mission we've been assigned by the American people. Homeland Security must detain migrants charged with crimes. Here again, common sense. Crimes like shoplifting, one of the crimes for which Laken's killer was arrested. The bill we're currently debating, the Laken Riley Act, requires that they do this, and that we meet the objectives of the American people as it relates to border security. You see, enforcing immigration law is a national security priority. I began emphasizing this years ago. I know so many other Americans believe this in their bones. It's time Washington started acting like it. So this bill is one of many steps we should take to reverse the Biden administration's open border policies. Stop the madness. Stop the madness. I plead with my colleagues to support the Laken Riley Act. We should pass it now. Let President Biden have his victory tour, but starting next week, the insanity ends, and we begin to secure our border. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield.
Senator from Nebraska.
Thank you, Mr. President. President Biden's open border policies have created a national security, humanitarian, and drug catastrophe in our country. In 2023, law enforcement encounters at the border found 169 people on FBI's terrorist watch list. In previous years, under the Trump administration, that number was in single digits. We've had 10.5 million border encounters since Biden took office. On a single day in December, U.S. Customs and Border Protection encountered 12,600 people trying to illegally enter into our country. That's just along the southern border, 12,600. It set an all-time single-day record for the number of people trying to break into our country. In years past, administration officials have said if there's 1,000 people encountered at our southern border trying to get in, that's a crisis. 12,600 is a catastrophe. Record amounts of deadly drugs have also flown into our country since President Biden opened our borders. We experienced this directly in Nebraska. In 2019, when I was governor, Nebraska law enforcement took 46 pills laced with fentanyl off of our streets. 46. Then, after Biden became president, in just the first 6 months of 2021, Nebraska law enforcement took 151,000 pills off our streets. From 46 to 151,000. While I was governor, after Biden became president, we saw that our law enforcement started confiscating twice as much methamphetamine, 3 times as much fentanyl, 10 times as much cocaine, because of our open southern border and the cartels taking advantage of it. And just like all around the country, our young people paid the price as well. Taryn Lee Griffith was a young mom of 2 who took a pill that was laced with fentanyl and died because of it. The single largest killer of Americans 18 to 45 is fentanyl overdose, all facilitated by President Biden's open border policies along our southern border. Jose Ibarra was a different kind of problem. Jose Ibarra was a Venezuelan national who crossed our border illegally in the Texas area and asked for asylum. His wife said he just wanted a better job, but regardless, the Biden administration released him into this country. He was bused in New York City, and there he was arrested for acting in a manner to endanger a child under the age of 17. However, New York City is a sanctuary city. He was not detained or deported, as he ought to have been. He was released. He made his way to Georgia, And once again, he was arrested, this time for shoplifting. But once again, he was not detained or deported by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And because he was not, he went on to brutally murder Laken Riley. This tragedy could have been avoided if President Biden had been protecting our southern border, if illegal immigrants were being detained and deported. People who break the laws in our country need to be held accountable. That's what the Laken Riley Act does. It requires Immigration and Customs Enforcement to detain people who are breaking our laws. When people come here illegally and they're breaking our laws, they need to be held accountable. With the Laken Riley Act, if you are committing theft, burglary, shoplifting, you will be detained. And tragedies like Laken Riley can be avoided. This is just common sense, that we need to enforce our laws. To me, it's common sense that we need to protect our borders. And thank goodness, starting in a few days, we will have a president who understands the safety of the American people is the priority. And President Trump will secure our borders. The election results were overwhelming. President Trump has a mandate to secure our borders. Senate Republicans will stand up to help him do just that. The Laken Riley Act is our first step to be able to help him do that. And I call upon my colleagues from the other side of the aisle to continue to support this bill as they've done on the previous votes. Let's get this bill passed. Let's make sure other families don't have to live through the tragedy that Laken Riley's family had to live through. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
The senator for Iowa is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our nation, this body, and the American people are all too familiar with stories like Laken Riley's. The 22-year-old nursing student beaten to death by an illegal immigrant. One who was already in police custody in New York City before being let go. Unfortunately, after 4 years of Biden's open border, this heartbreaking story has become too commonplace. Hardly a day goes by without hearing of another American who has fallen victim to crimes perpetrated by the illegal immigrants the Biden administration let flood into our country. And worse, too many times an illegal immigrant arrested for a violent crime posts bail, never to be heard from again, escaping through loopholes in the law. This crisis only continues. While these tragedies should have never happened in the first place, my colleagues and I are taking action to ensure they never happen again. My legislation, Sarah's Law, in conjunction with the Laken Riley Act, will close these loopholes so our laws no longer prioritize illegal immigrants over our own citizens. Working to secure the border and protect Americans is not a new fight for me, but it became personal nearly 9 years ago. On the 31st of January, so at the end of this month, marks 9 years since Iowans Michelle Root and Scott Root, who I know personally, woke up to every parent's worst nightmare. Their daughter, Sarah, was killed by a drunk driver that was an illegal immigrant. Sarah, and she is a beautiful young woman. She was 21 years old. She was from Council Bluffs, and she had just graduated from Bellevue University in Nebraska with a 4.0 GPA. She had her bachelor's degree in criminal investigations. She was headed home after celebrating this really important milestone with her family and her friends. Sarah had her entire life ahead of her. But instead, an illegal immigrant, Edwin Mejia, who was drunk driving with a blood alcohol level 3 times over the legal limit, struck and killed her. One would think that Sarah's killer would clearly meet immigration and customs enforcement priorities. But no. Citing the Obama administration's November 2014 memo, ICE declined to take custody of Mejia, despite his repeated driving offenses and history of skipping court dates. Before the Root family could even lay Sarah to rest, her murderer posted bond and was released, never to be seen again. To rub salt in the wound, the Biden administration removed Mejia from ICE's most wanted list. Since then, I have warned repeatedly against the dangers of letting illegal immigrants who have already broken our laws roam the country and continue their lawlessness. I have continually called on this body to step up and protect innocent Americans from criminals who are here in our country illegally and pass my bill, Sarah's Law. A loophole in the law means Sarah's killer escaped justice. But today we can do something to ensure no other family has to go through the pain and the grief that Sarah's parents, Scott and Michelle, still feel from their heartbreaking day. My bill, named in Sarah's honor, would close the alarming loophole that let Sarah's killer go free. It would simply require ICE to detain illegal immigrants charged with killing or seriously injuring another person so they do not disappear before facing justice. It's common sense, folks. No parent should have to endure the pain of losing a child like the Root family did. But unfortunately, the Riley family is experiencing this same heartbreak. Sarah and Laken's deaths are both tragic and unfortunately are doomed to be repeated if we don't close the loopholes in that law. Those who come here illegally and harm our citizens should, without question, be detained so they face justice. Again, folks, this is common sense. We can no longer prioritize illegal immigrants over public safety. We must pass the Laken Riley Act and Sarah's Law to send this message loud and clear for Sarah's family, for Laken's family, and for the countless American families that this action would protect. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.